Hi, I'm Alessia, and you're about to watch a message that was preached at Calvary Fellowship in Miramar, Florida. At Calvary, we exist to help you take your next step with God. If you'd like to learn more about Calvary, make sure to download our mobile app on the App Store or Google Play Store by searching up My Calvary.
How's everybody doing? Hey, we are glad that you're here. I'm glad you braved the weather. Happy Father's Day. I hope you're enjoying it all. And dads, I just want to encourage you. I hope you enjoy the tie, the wallet, or the shaving kit that you received. And if you haven't gotten your Father's Day gift, let me give you a spoiler alert. You are either going to get a tie or a wallet or a shaving kit or beard kit, depending on your facial hair preference. And that's just how it is. And, so... And that's what we get. And because being a dad, honestly, it's not as hard. It's way harder to be a mom than it is to be a dad. And the hardest part of being a dad is when we actually have to cover for mom. That's the hardest part of being a dad. And people don't expect a lot from us as dads. And that's why people are amazed. If you've ever been out with your kids without your wife, people are in shock whenever they see you. It's true. I remember this is a few years ago. My wife was ill, and so I was in charge of my kids for 3 full days. So that Saturday, I took the kids to Chick-fil-A for lunch so that my wife could just get some rest. And let me tell you something about me. I used to run a college. I've started 3 companies. I planted a church, and I've written 7 books. And taking those 3 kids to Chick-fil-A is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Because it was insane. Because getting just 3 kids to eat and not harm themselves is a feat in and of itself. And I remember Livy was young. I mean, she was probably about 2. So she's sitting in the high chair, and I'm cutting the chicken nuggets to give to her, because you know how it is. You got to cut it into like microscopic pieces. And then my son, Xander, he says, hey, Dad. And I look over, and Xander has just taken his shirt off. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And he's, Anyway, so while I'm telling him to put his shirt back on, I look over, and Livy she's picking up the pieces of chicken and just testing gravity, and she's dropping them on the floor. So now I'm turning to her, and I'm like, Livy, please, would you stop? Just eat the chicken. Well, I'm saying eat the chicken. I look over at Mia, and she's already done with her chicken. Now she's eating all of Livy's chicken. And I'm like, could you leave your sister's chicken to her? And it's this whole madness that's going on. And then, maybe you remember this. I finally understood this commercial after all these years. Remember the Calgon commercial? The Calgon, take me away. I'm like, now I finally get it. This is what it means. And then after all of that, I don't smell much, but I smelled that. And I'm like, oh no. And Livy was like 2 at the time, and because I'm a dad, dads don't bring diaper bags. And I'm like, no. So, and that was the end of that. But I'm telling you, people saw me. I walked into Chick-fil-A with 3 children without my wife, and people looked like I was some kind of saint. They were like, who is this man? Is he from the future? I mean, seriously. And because when you see a mom with 3 kids, it's business as usual. You see a dad with 3 kids, and you think someone has been injured. That's just what you believe. And now, the thing that we're trying to do, right, as dads, we try to do this, where we're trying to help our kids to see this. We're trying to help even our friends see this. We're trying to have our spouse see this, right? We're trying to help them see the future, because all of us have an expectation to be able to see the future. And I'm not talking about a crystal ball, but all of us, because we all have this expectation, we all say this phrase. We've all said, I should have seen it coming. That is, that something happens that we didn't want to happen, and we say, based on this and this and this and that, I should have seen it unfolding. And there's just this expectation that we have that we should be able to see the end of the story that's happening. And the funny thing is that it's easy to see it with other people, right? You ever, you're talking to your friend, and you tell your friend, hey, listen, she's going to break up with you. And the guy's, what? No way. And then it happens, and he's offended. Like, I can't believe you said that. And then it's like it goes down, and you're like, well, how is it only a shock to that person? But everybody else can see it, right? I mean, so on Friday is typically my day off here. And so we went to Target as a family. And we're walking out, my wife it was 3 o'clock. And I don't know if there's a lot of things that happen in this world that are random, but one of the things that are not, and that is that my wife will have coffee at 3 p.m. That's how I know what time it is. Anywhere in the world is that she's having coffee at 3 p.m. So anyway, she says, hey, I'm going to get some coffee on the way out. The kids want coffee. And I say, fine, I'll take all the groceries to the car, load it up, and then meet you out front. So we get home, and I open the garage, because we're going to put some stuff in the garage, and then we're going to put some stuff in the house. And so we're unloading the groceries, and I see Mia trying to grab too many bags at the same time. So she takes her Breve Latte from Starbucks, and she puts it on the bumper. And then she goes to grab the bags. And see, you already know how this story ends. This is how you're able to see the future. So, right, and I say, hey, be careful, because you... Drink is going to spill. And then I just watched as the latte was draining, and all I could see was $5 in liquid form, and so 15 seconds later, I'm going to the garage. Now, my daughter, Livy, she doesn't do coffee or whatever, but she drinks, or she bought a cake pop. So she has a cake pop in her hand, but she also has a Target bag in her hand that she's going to help. And so she's then going to open her hand so that she can open the bag so she can put the stuff in. And so, but she's got it in the same hand as the cake pop. And I'm like, hey, be careful, or... And I watched $2.25 roll down my sidewalk. And my kids look at me like I'm some kind of prophet. And I'm, Dad, how did you know? Because I know how the story ends, right? I just know how this story ends, right? And this is the point, right? So here's what Proverbs says. It says this. It says, a prudent person foresees, not just sees, foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly and suffers the consequences. This is why wisdom is so powerful in your life, why we need it so badly, because wisdom is the means by which we can see the end of the story, predict the future, and step into the life that we've been seeking. And it doesn't require a crystal ball. It simply requires an understanding that comes from wisdom and that's available to every person who will seek it. Now, if you're just joining us, you've been out, or maybe you just had a recent case of amnesia, we started a new series a couple of weeks ago that we're called in the book of Proverbs. Now, if you're not aware, Proverbs is what's called part of the wisdom literature. In the Hebrew scriptures, it was written by King Solomon. And if you say, well, who's Solomon? King David, like David and Goliath, David. He had a son named Solomon who became the king of Israel. And he was said to be the wisest man in the world up until that time. Some say he's the wisest man ever to live. Jesus talked about the wisdom of Solomon, and I've been saying this in every message. If Jesus calls you wise, that's a good thing to put in your Instagram profile. So that's a good thing. So we're calling it hindsight because one of the things that we understand is that hindsight brings a ton of wisdom with it. That's why we always say, if I knew then what I know now, things would be different. And so what Proverbs does is that it actually takes the wisdom that would come from hindsight and it front loads it before the situation or the circumstance that we're in. And so we're able to make decisions and choices with the benefit of hindsight before things take place. And so when you're in a situation where you need to make a big decision, and if you aren't now, you soon will be, listen, when you're standing there, the thing that you need most is wisdom. So what Solomon is going to do is he's going to tell us a story. Now, this is a little bit different because if you're not familiar with Proverbs, Proverbs is a collection of all of these sayings that Solomon had, all these incredibly wise sayings, and most of them are written in typical Hebrew poetry. And for us, poetry is... the idea is that it needs to rhyme. Hebrew poetry is what's referred to as Hebrew parallelism, and that is that the ideas have to match. And that is, they are either the same or they're totally opposite. That's how Hebrew poetry works. But instead, he does something different. He's going to tell us a story. And here's the thing. You're going to be able to know, like we're going to start reading and you're going to say, oh, even if you've never read it before, you go, I know how this is going to end. Why? Because you've just been around and you have enough wisdom. And now, but here's the challenge. Sometimes we see it for others, but not for ourselves. Now, this isn't going to be like an M. Night Shyamalan film where there's like a weird twist at the end and you're going to be like, well, Bruce Willis was dead the whole time. You know, that's not the case. But we're just going to see. Now, we're going to see people walking a particular path. And what we're going to recognize is this, and we know this to be true. Sometimes we just don't recognize it for ourselves. And that is that the path people take, not their intentions, the path that we take, not our intentions, ultimately determine where we end up. And so what Solomon does is that he's actually takes this section, and it's like he's talking to his son. And essentially, he's treating us as if we were one of his kids. And he's saying, listen, son, here's what I want you to know. Just like every dad wants their kids to know that good intentions aren't enough. And if we want to be wise in the path that we take and we want to obtain the life that we dream of having, we have to recognize that it's not simply a choice. It's every choice brings with it a path that we walk. Now, he's going to tell us this as he tells his son that there's two characters in the story. There's this naive young man. There's this, and number two, there is this seductive married woman. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And so we're going to start in Proverbs chapter 7 and starting verse 6. And here's what we're going to read. It says, for at the window of my house I looked through my lattice and saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths, a young man devoid of understanding, passing along the street near her house and her path. And he took the path to her house in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. Dun, dun, dun. That's my translation, by the way. And there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him. And with an impotent or shameless face, she said to him, I've made my peace offerings. I have my peace offerings with me. Today I've paid my vows. So she's telling him, and we're not sure if, what faith she has, if she was Jewish or one of the, ancient Canaanite religions. But she's saying she has done some kind of religious activity that makes, clears her up, for anything she's going to do in the future. But she says, I've paid my... I have my peace offerings with me today. I've paid my vows, so I came out to meet you, diligently to seek your face. And I have found you. I have spread my bed with tapestry, colored coverings of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Now, let me tell you why this is important. Here's the thing you have to understand about the ancient world. The ancient world stank. Now, understand, nobody was zestfully clean. Because there was no zest. Nobody was shampooing and cream rinsing their hair because there was no shampoo or cream rinsing. They would just kind of try to wash stuff off, and then they'd pour oil on them and try to... And so once again, and if you've ever been to a third world country, you recognize that it just stinks. I remember going on a missions trip in a third world country, and they told me when we got there that the country was in a drought. And so I'm going up this mountain where we're going to be working at this orphanage. And I see water running down the hill. And I say, I thought you said that there was a drought. And they're like, that's not water. That's open sewage. Quickly changed my path to not walk through that. But listen, the ancient world stinks. So she's saying, I want to give you a break from this world that stinks. I want to give you an experience with all of the scents that you'd love, right? Because she's got myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. And so here's what she says in verse 18. Come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love, for my husband's not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He's taken a bag of money with him and will come home on the appointed day. Now, if you pause there and give me your attention. So Solomon, our narrator, is giving us three perspectives. The young man's perspective, the young woman's perspective, and his own perspective. Now, if we were making a movie out of this scene, we'd have to score it. right? We'd have to have some music. And so picking the music would have to be based on which perspective that we go with. So if we're going to go with the young man's perspective, I mean, what would it, I mean, you know, so what is he thinking about this whole situation? Maybe if we're scoring it from his perspective, the music would sound something like this. This guy shows up and he's like, what are the chances? This is the adventure of a lifetime for me, right? And so now, if we were, so that's his perspective. If it were her perspective, I mean, you know, what would the sound, maybe the movie for her would sound something like this. You see, she's saying to him, I want you to come over to my place, and this is going to be a night of romance with no consequences. My husband is out of town, so let's get it on. All right? And so Solomon, with all his wisdom, he's looking on with a very different perspective. He hears this song as it's going on. You see, these two think this is going to be the greatest night ever. And he's like, the shark is going to kill you. And this is what happens. And so what happens? So go to verse 21. He says this, with her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him. Immediately he went after her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would cost his life. You see, here's the problem, is that neither this man nor this woman realize where the path is taking them. And so Solomon does. Why? Because wisdom teaches us something, that your path, not your intentions, your path, not your intentions, determine your destination. So here's what Solomon tells his son at the end. He says, now therefore, listen to me, my children, pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths, for she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. If you pause there, what's the point of the story? The point of the story that Solomon wants to know is that all of us can predict the future if we decide to employ wisdom. Because we're reading the story and all of us know how this whole thing is going down. Why? Because we understand it. And listen, and there's 3 lessons here that are important for us to understand that we need to learn that will be game changers if we recognize that Solomon, not the young man or this woman, but Solomon is the one who was really seeing reality for what it is. Now, if you're a note taker, here's the first one. Here's what we have to understand, is that change is a process, not a decision. Change is a process, not a decision. It's one of the reasons why change eludes us is because we don't understand this, that change is a process, not a decision. Now, we understand this in some areas of life, but in others, we don't make the connection. So you make a decision, you and your spouse, you talk, and you say, you know what, we're going to get out of debt. You know what happens? Nothing, right? You just made a decision. You haven't actually done anything yet. There's a path that you've got to walk on and daily make decisions to stay on that path to actually get to the destination that you want, right? You decide you're going to lose weight and you say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit. I'm going to lose weight. And you know what happens? Nothing. That's why I always say that the second day of an eating plan is always the worst day, because you have all of the commitment and none of the results. And by the way, you know you've been on an eating plan for a long time when you start dreaming about carbs. And this is like what happens to me. If you want to know, what do pastors dream about? I'll tell you a dream I had the other night. I had a dream that I was eating a giant vanilla cupcake. Now, I'm not big on ice cream or whatever, but cupcakes are my jam. And so I was having this dream. I was eating this giant vanilla cupcake, and I woke up, and I was like, my wife was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's just so vivid." And seriously. And she's like, "What happened?" I had this dream. I was eating this giant cupcake. And she's like, "Wow, I'm so sorry. Here's an onion." And which I ended up eating, but that's not really the point. And so now, we recognize that change is a process in those things, but so here's what happens in your marriage. It's a little bit different. Emotionally, we think it's a little bit different. Something happens in your marriage, you ask your spouse to forgive you, and you promise to change. That is a decision, but nothing has changed yet. The process is just beginning. And then when we don't get the level of trust that we want, or kind of the level of goodwill that we want, we now start blaming our spouse. "I thought you forgave me." No, here's what we're doing. We're judging, we're asking people, see, we judge ourselves based on our intentions. Everybody else is looking at our track record and saying, "What steps are you taking?" You see, my favorite way to illustrate this is at my brother and sister-in-law's, they have this mirror at their house. It's a full-length mirror that is the greatest mirror of all time, because every person who looks in this mirror is thin. It really is incredible, because you are 6 inches taller and 15 pounds lighter. And so I was there last week, and you know what I did half the time I was at their house? I stood in front of this mirror. Different perspectives. So I'm doing all this, and I'm saying to myself, I was looking at myself, and I'm like, I look so hot right now. I actually thought that in my mind. I didn't say it out loud. Well, I did right now, but I was thinking that. So anyway, and then my sister-in-law comes over to me, and I say to her, I'm like, "I love this mirror so much." And she says, "You know what the problem is with this mirror?" I said, "What?" She says, "It only shows us what we want to see. The best mirrors are the ones that show reality and what need to change." I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. I said, and that's wise. And I said, and you unknowingly just quoted an entire scene from the first Harry Potter movie, which is also quite interesting. But here's our challenge, right? Is that we need to understand that change is not a decision. Change is a path that we walk on. You see, because when you change direction, listen, this is huge. When you change direction, things eventually change. Not when you change decisions, when you change direction and you start walking that new path, when you change direction, things eventually change. Here's the second thing that's important for us to understand, and that is this. You are not the exception to the rule. You're not the exception to the rule. If you've ever been to see a counselor, here's why counselors are so good at what they do. Because they understand this principle that you and I are not the exception to the rule. You see, counselors understand this. They know this, that you are unique, but your story is not. You're uniquely created by God. That is absolutely true. But the path that we're on is not unique, because it doesn't matter who you are. When you go down a certain road, it always gets there. And whether that's a good road or whether that's a bad road, that road always leads to its destination. This is years ago, I'm having a conversation with a friend of mine about wanting to get healthy, and this is way before I actually did. But we started talking about how bad sugar was, and carbs, and French fries, and everything that brings joy to this world. And so I'm talking about how soda's going to kill us, and you got to eat more salad and fiber and whatever. But here's the problem, right? That's the intention, but let me tell you the reality. We were eating McDonald's while we were having that conversation. So, and see, because the intention doesn't matter. Because you might think, well, that Big Mac meal with extra special sauce, which, by the way, if we can sidebar for a second, if you're going to go, Big Mac meal with extra special sauce, thank me later. All right? So anyway, not that I eat that anymore, but I like to encourage others that don't have issues. Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe you're one of these people that you can eat whatever you want and not lose weight, and everyone dislikes you. Anyway, go there. Be happy. Hang out with other people who have the same situation. Anyway, but listen, that Big Mac meal with extra special sauce, it's not just lunch, it's a path. And we always get into trouble when we think that it's the exception or that we're the exception. Because here's the reality. Someone else has already gone down that road. And the wise person is able to look beyond the one decision and ask the question, what trajectory is this step taking me on? You see, Proverbs 14, Solomon says this, there is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. I want you to notice that the person thinks it's good, but the intention doesn't matter. The road still leads to where it leads. This is why the decisions that we make that we think are little diversions aren't little diversions. They're changes in course that lead somewhere else. And so what we'll do is that we'll drink too much or eat too much or get angry too much or spend too much. And here's what we need to ask. Instead, here's what we ask. We ask this question. Well, is it technically okay? I mean, is it morally all right? I mean, is there any verse in the Bible specifically that deals with shopping too much at Nordstrom? Is Nordstrom in the Bible? How about Five Below? Anything about doing it, just like to cover the whole spectrum? How about Walmart? No. Oh, it does mention hell, but not Walmart specifically. But here's what happens, is that what we try to do is we're trying to find this line. And yet, here's what we have to do. We got to ask a different question. We got to ask a question, where does this path take me? You see, because once again, every path, it leads where it leads, and some lead to great places and some don't. But the thing we have to stop telling ourselves is that we're the exception to that rule. We're not. Here's the last one. This is the hardest one. That's why I saved it for last. And that is, we've got to give up what we want now for what we want most. You got to give up what you want now for what you want most. This is the struggle of our lives, because what we want is to think that this little diversion, this little decision, it's not going to veer me off course. It always veers us off course. We recognize that. We've got to be wise. That means we look further down the field. And we've got to decide that what we want most matters more than what we want now. So let me explain what I mean. If you're married, what do we want most versus what do we want now? If you're married, here's what you want, right? I think I can speak for all of us. You want joy. You want marital harmony, right? This is what everybody's trying to figure out. Okay, if that's what you want most, you know what you're going to have to give up? The thing that you want now. And here's the thing that couples do all the time that they want now. They want to be right. Listen, you can't fight for joy and harmony and fight for being right at the same time. Because there's a big difference between fighting for what's right and fighting for being right. When you fight for what's right, you end up with joy and harmony. When you fight for being right, you're like, well, this round goes to me. And you don't realize that if you win, both of you lose. What do you want most physically? Well, I want to be healthy and see my grandkids and all that. And that means, listen, we're going to have to give up the instant gratification that comes from unhealthy habits. What do we want emotionally? We would say this, that we want to be loved, that we want to be respected and accepted. We want all of those things, but here's what we have to give up if that's what we want most. We have to give up trying to control everything and everyone. How about personally? Here's what we want personally. We want freedom. We want freedom from addiction, from emotions that overwhelm us at times. We want freedom from the outside pressures that try to control us. And so what do we have to let go of now to get that which we want most? And it's a little bit counterintuitive. Here's what we have to let go of now. The desire to disengage. Because the desire to disengage feels like freedom, but it's not. Disengaging says, I'm not dealing with this. When really what we have to do, if what we really want is freedom, we have to lean in even harder. You see, when we disengaged, here's what we do. We turn to drugs, alcohol. We turn to emotional drugs like anger and rage that cause us to feel like, hey, I'm disengaging. Because what I'm doing is I'm not going to process these emotions, the situation that I'm uncomfortable with. So guys, you get angry, here's what you do. And it feels like, and maybe you've never thought of it like this, but you are putting on like a suit of armor because we don't want to admit that we're hurt. We don't want to admit that we're wrong, and we're numbing ourselves the same way we would numb ourselves with drug or alcohol, with food or anything else, because we're exchanging what we want most for what we want now. How about spiritually? You see, spiritually, I think we would all say, here's what we want. We want purpose. We want to know that we're been put on this planet for a reason, that we aren't an accident. But you know what we have to do to embrace purpose, God's purpose for our lives, the thing that we want and need most? We have to give up our own purpose, trying to be in control of our own lives, because here's the reality, and this is what's so powerful, is that so many of us are exhausted. We're exhausted of being in control of our lives, and truth be told, it hasn't gone all that well. That's why Jesus, as he looked out at the crowds of people, right, here's what the gospel writer, Matthew, this tax collector, who was hated by everyone, and Jesus called him and said, I want you to come with me. And he's reflecting later, and he's like, I got to tell this story. And he writes down the story of Jesus. And here's what he says. Because he was a guy that was exhausted. And Jesus gave him the one thing that he wanted: purpose. Rest from trying to just live up to everybody else's expectations. You see, Jesus, it says, Matthew writes, that he looked at the people and he had compassion. Compassion like a father would have. Compassion like a shepherd would have, because he saw all the people just kind of wandering about like sheep without a shepherd. They're just kind of wandering aimlessly. And so he calls out to the crowd, and here's what he says to them. He says, come to me. All of you who labor and are heavy laden, that is, you're weighed down, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Listen, Jesus came into this world to bring us many good things, but one of the things that he offers to us when we come to him is rest. For some of us, it's rest from having to be perfect. For others of us, it's rest from trying to have it all figured out. For others of us still, it's rest from having to live with guilt and shame and regret. You see, he's offering us life. And that life leads on a path that we've only dreamed of. And listen, maybe today's the day. Maybe this Father's Day is the day that we call on God, who wants to be our Heavenly Father and forgive us and transform us and set us on a path that we will look back and see how much has changed, how much our life has been transformed because we did the one thing Jesus asked people to do, the thing that Jesus asked Matthew to do when he met him. Here's what he said. He just said this one word: follow. Follow me. Follow me. Let's start walking on a different path together. And let's see that when you change direction, things eventually change. Let's pray together. And Lord, we want to thank you that you invite us to follow you. So Lord, help us, work in us. You want to do a work in this room even right now. So as we hear your voice, God, I pray that we would start walking on the path that you have for us. Listen, with every head bowed and every eye closed as we're praying together, if you say, Pastor, that's me. I need Jesus to come into my life, and I want to let go of the past. I want forgiveness from the past. I want the purpose that comes from knowing him, from walking with him. Listen, if that's you, I want to pray for you as we close. With every head bowed, with every eye closed, I'm going to invite you to simply lift your hand right now so I can pray for you as we close. Just lift them up. I see some hands there. Lift them up, lift them up, lift them up. Yeah, hands all over this room. Lord, I thank you for every hand that's lifted that represents a heart that is open and ready for you to do the work that only you can do. So God, as we call out to you, may you hear from heaven and walk with us on the path since you've invited us to follow you. Listen, those of you that lifted your hand, I want to invite you to repeat this prayer with me. It's not a magic formula. It's a prayer of commitment, saying, God, we're going to begin this journey of following you. In fact, we're all going to pray it out loud together. Just say, Dear God, I come to you today, and I'm sorry for all I've done wrong. But I thank you for Jesus, who died for me, that I might have life. I want to walk with you, starting right now. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Make sure to click the subscribe button below to stay up to date with all the things happening here at Calvary. God bless you.